The Pacific Heights real estate market has actually been performing really well later into the year. Um, More better than we expected at least. And I think that really follows on with a trend that I really identified during the pandemic, and that is buyers have sort of created a hyper importance on neighborhood and location as opposed to property. And we really saw that in the condominium market where buyers that would typically seek maybe a more updated unit in a Lower Pack Heights or a Western Addition or an Anza Vista um, really targeted their search and focused on sort of the highly prominent neighborhoods, the Pacific Heights, the Russian Hill, the Cow Hollows of the city. And we actually saw that sort of really flow in the condominium market in Pack Heights. In November, there was 20 sales, which is really along the lines of a typical summer month where you see a higher volume of sales. Like 22, 23, 24 is sort of the peak of a lot of summer months before the pandemic. So seeing the market this active this late into the year actually gives me a whole lot of confidence that there are a ton of buyers out there for properties in Pacific Heights, especially condominiums, and especially those with some private outdoor space or a view. Like those are highly sought after. And then sort of trickling into the single family market, it was actually the opposite of the condominium market where we saw only one sort of median price point sale around 5 to 6 and only one luxury price point sale for the purposes of this market data. I say a luxury price point is $1 million above the median. So in Pacific Heights, if the median's 5.5, like anything north of 6.5, but in reality in Pac Heights, it's sort of anything north of 10. And I think what most people predicted and sort of the general consensus in the agent community for the ultra high end of San Francisco is a lot of buyers were waiting for the city in its totality to rebound, as in everything that a fully vibrant San Francisco looks like before the pandemic. I think a lot of buyers were sort of waiting to see some of those things fall into place before investing in a 10, 15, $20 million house, which makes complete sense, right? Come with me sort of behind the scenes. I want to pull you into the data. I'm going to screen share my screen so you can see what I'm seeing, and I'll just talk through a few sort of more impressionable market data points that I think are really typical and significant in the market that we're in. So, welcome behind the scenes to sort of what we use for a lot of our graphs and trend lines to give us a good sort of appreciation of what's actually happening in sort of the macro sense of sales. And what I've got first that I want to run you through is Pacific Heights and San Francisco County, just sort of using this orange line of SF County as a baseline. And then Pacific Heights in purple being sort of what we're really looking at. And if I hyper focus all detached, it's not going to quite work because the single family home prices are so drastically different to the condominiums. But if I pull this graph to monthly data over the last 3 years, so we get a good impression of 2018 and 2019, and then the pandemic, as you can see, like Pacific Heights really was not affected by the pandemic. Sure, 2020 didn't have sort of a big peak midsummer season where you typically see like the over the two in the condominium market for median sales price. But as you can sort of see it's just been steadily consistent around like 1.5, 1.6. And then later in 2021, we start to see that 1.8 number start to get eclipsed pretty steadily, which I think is really indicative of sort of what I was saying, where the condominium buyer, instead of looking for something in a little less desirable of a neighborhood, like maybe a Lower Pacific Heights, a Western Addition, an Anza Vista, a Civic Center, or like maybe the Van Ness Corridor, they really hyper focus their attention on Pacific Heights, like true Pac Heights. And you saw a lot of sales. Like I said, there was 20 last month. And if I sort of roll this out to a 3-month rolling average, you just see how consistent this has been, which is consistently in line with 2018, 2019. And then you had sort of some random spikes. It's really indicative that Pac Heights was just really mostly unaffected by this pandemic, other than days on market. And this is true of all condominium data. We saw basically from March 2020 onwards in most markets, Pack heights not so much, but in most, like you see this San Francisco orange trend line, days on market just peaked around end of winter season, like Q1 2021, and then really tanked off towards the summer because May, like this just shows how active this real estate market has been all year and how in totality, San Francisco in general is mostly past the effects of the pandemic real estate wise, outside of less desirable neighborhoods like deep South San Francisco, etc. Like it hasn't, Bayview and Hunters Point haven't rebounded, but Pacific Heights obviously has. And then sort of coming into the single family home data, and I'm actually going to delete the San Francisco, which turns this Pack Heights line back to orange, just because the gap between, single family, like the average San Francisco single family is 2 million, the average Pacific Heights is 6.5. But as you can see, like this is pandemic. Like basically since the pandemic, this graph has on average basically been at an all-time high, other than one peak month or two in June of 2018, where there was just a handful of massive sales that really pulled the entire median up. But in general terms, like the average over time, Pacific Heights has been about as steady as any other neighborhood in the city, if not the most steady. And again, days on market, basically since March for most Pacific Heights single family homes, like the desirable stuff moves within a few days. The desirable stuff moves off market in reality, but anything that actually hits the market, 23 days at most, has sort of been pretty average. So I think what all of this data shows me, and we can go into like average price per foot over like the last 5 years, you can sort of see a steady rolling increase. Monthly supply, like the amount of listings actively on the market. Obviously, over the pandemic, there was a peak in supply. It's really sort of dropped off. What this data shows me is the Pack Heights real estate market fared so well throughout the pandemic that now that we're towards the tail end of 2021, nearing winter, the fact that properties are still selling at the price that they're selling at, they're sitting on the market as few days as they're sitting on the market. I think this winter will be more traditional of a winter where you see less supply, you see less buyers, you see less properties sell, but there are a ton of buyers in the market. So I wouldn't be surprised if anything happened in December or January. So as you can see, the Pack Heights market is actually rolling really well later into the year. It's been rolling really well all year, basically since the pandemic started. Given that it's Pacific Heights is sort of that marquee north side San Francisco neighborhood, I think all buyer attention sort of flocked towards it as opposed to looking in less desirable neighborhoods. And I think that'll continue in December and January, sort of in these winter months. So if you are in the market to buy something, there's a ton on the market right now. There are a ton of opportunities and deals. And there's also a ton of buyers if you have that sort of desirable product, like a 2-bed, 2-bath with views, or a 4-bed, 4-bath, sort of 2,500 plus square foot single family home. There are buyers in the market right now waiting to pounce. So if you have any questions, again, shoot me a text, leave a comment. I'm here to answer any questions and sort of dive into the data with you, and we'll keep doing this every single month.